welcome to the podcast, Nourish and Nurture podcast. It's the episode 4, and I'm here sitting with Dr. Taru Jindal. And it's been an absolute pleasure. The moment I met her, this is my second meeting with her, but it seems like we are connected at the soul. I already feel the connection, and I feel the comfort and the space that she creates in her heart seems so true. And I was blown away with her experiences that she's had, and I felt it is absolutely a must for me to share this with whoever is listening to us. And so I want to share what her journey has been. So Dr. Taru Jindal is a distinguished obstetrician gynecologist and an internationally certified lactation consultant who has made transformative contributions to maternity and child health across India. Now a TEDx speaker and an award-winning author, Dr. Jindal's journey began with her pioneering work at the Motihari District Hospital in Bihar, where she led initiatives that elevated the hospital from one of the state's poorest to award-winning status within a year. Known for her innovative approach and a heartful approach, Dr. Jindal has created impactful online programs, including one for the breastfeeding education and another for vaginismus healing, helping hundreds of women nationwide. Her dedication has earned her accolades such as Mother Teresa Memorial Award and recognition as a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient in breastfeeding advocacy. Dr. Jindal's ongoing mission is to enhance healthcare access, empower women and families, and inspire systemic change in the rural health settings. So, welcome today.
Thanks a lot, Ifat. I'm thrilled to be here. I have been super inspired by your work ever since I was doing my residency.
Oh my God, that's so lovely. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And so I want to begin this conversation by this wonderful book that it inspires me. So I want you to see this. This is a book written by Dr. Taru Jindal, A Doctor's Experiments in Bihar. And I think it opens many portals of understanding and awareness, Dr. Jindal. So I want to open this conversation by beginning, where did you begin your journey? Like, starting from whatever you wanted to be as a child, what was your path and how did it lead to an experiment the way you did in Bihar?
Right. So no one actually starts off thinking that we are, nobody starts off thinking about the end point.
Yes.
That I'm going to be in Bihar and do this.
Yes.
But we only look 100 meters ahead and we just keep being sincere in those 100 meters, right? And it just adds up. So the Mount Everest is not there, standing there. Mount Everest is created.
Yes.
With every 100 meters adding up. So I grew up in a very privileged environment, which was Bhabha Atomic Research Center.
Okay.
My father was a nuclear scientist, and we saw the best there was, to be had, and best schools, best facilities, and there used to be a question. I have everything, and there was. I didn't have a desire to keep getting things for myself.
Because you had it.
I already had it, right?
Yes.
And so there used to be a question, what more is there to life than what I already have? Right? And my father was a social worker when I was younger. And I saw him very often doing things like some community activities. And I was a really small kid looking at him at that time. So that was the first thing that got me thinking that he's doing something beyond what we already have. Right? So what can I do? Later on, I was exposed to some books, and I remember reading my experiments, Gandhiji's book, My Experiments with Truth, in my secondary school. And most of it I didn't understand, but I was just amazed with his inner life, because we all know what he did outside.
Yeah, sure.
But the transformation that he went through from the time he was a kid to England, to South Africa, to India. This is what made him the Mahatma, right?
Yes.
So I was very influenced by that inner work where we are ethical, we are honest. And those inner qualities really inspired me. And so I kind of started to go that way. Then I wanted to be a doctor because I am from a family of doctors. And that's what I've seen.
It's very natural for you to do that.
It's very natural for me. And my brother was already into medicine by the time I had to decide where to go. So as much as it was natural for me to get into medicine, it really came into me in 11th standard when my grandmother got paralyzed. And for 3 years, she was on the bed. And I remember that time, I mean, it was not a trend to hire servants to take care of elders, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we did everything ourselves. And at that time, I remember after coming back from college, I used to sit down, even without changing my uniform, and I used to dress her bed sores. Because my brother had taught me how to dress bed sores. And I used to spend an hour doing everything properly. And that's when a thought came, this is what I'm good at.
Ah,
This is what I'm good at because I feel absolute one while doing this. The sense of harmony I felt while taking care of her was what was me, is
Right.
what I realized in 11th standard. And so I
Beautiful.
thought I either have to become a nurse
Okay.
or I have to become a doctor, much less a doctor, wanted to be a nurse.
Nurse more, yeah.
Because I
can.
felt nurses are more hands-on.
Nurturing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They bring the nurturing aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're like with the patient. But anyways, ended up being a doctor and was just wanting to be a doctor. That's it. And do good work. But the turning point came in my first year medicine itself when I met my husband.
Okay.
My husband, Dr. Dharav, he was a part of an organization called Prachiti.
All right.
Prachiti means self-realization. It was an organization of medical students where medical students were exposed to their social side
Okay.
through various visits. So through that, I got to know about Dr. Prakash Amte, Dr. Abhay Bang. These were doctors who could have minted crores, but they instead went to tribal areas of Maharashtra and been serving there since 3 to 4 decades. And those stories just, based on the foundation I already had, those were the seeds that just planted and just grew like anything, right?
Yeah.
It was just the soil waiting for those seeds.
Right.
And it came through my husband, who I was and not even dating, but who I met at that time. In fact, I met him on the second day of my MBBS.
All right. Okay.
And that's how that conversation happened with him about how we need to be where we really are needed. Instead of being in Mumbai, where every 100 meters you have a super specialist, let's go and work in areas where there is no one. Now, all of this was very theoretical for me in my MBBS time because I was in Mumbai.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And these are just stories I was
It's
hearing.
it's an own bubble, right? You have an own bubble of being in Mumbai.
Yes. So there was a lot of desire to do it, but I had absolutely no real-time understanding of how a village even looks like.
Right.
Right. And so after my medicine, MBBS, I was like getting into gynecology.
Yeah.
So my husband
How
said,
did you get interested in that? Like, how did you choose that?
I think it was very, very natural that I had a huge nurturing spirit inside me.
Right.
Like the same time my grandmother's thing was happening in 11th standard, I remember there was a show on Hallmark that was a TV channel. Every Sunday they used to show one episode of adoption. Adoption stories from across the world. And I was hooked onto it. And the amount of that nurturing spirit I saw in that serial, all of these things started to resonate with me. That I want to adopt a child. That was the first dream I had in life. Even before thinking of my own, I was like, I want to adopt a child. So the nurturing spirit was the first thing that I knew about me. And so when I got into medicine and we were doing these various postings, the posting that influenced me the most was my obs-gynae posting.
Right.
Because when I was in that posting, again, there was a sense of I am one with the world, that kind of spirit.
Yes.
And then I would see, and like one of my teachers told me that, Taru, these 3 days, this lady is here with you.
Okay.
From labor to maybe when she gets discharged.
Okay.
This is the only time she'll come into a hospital. She'll probably come next when she's pregnant again. And she might never have these evolved thoughts coming her way. This is your time. 72 hours. This is what you have to change her life. And so you don't just change a woman's life, you change her and whatever comes from her after that. So that got almost like, I got hooked onto that thought. So I remember...
You saw that as an opportunity, right?
Yes. So for me it was like, okay, I have 24 hours in the labor room. So I wouldn't just take care of her routine labor things. But I remember standing there in between her contractions, holding her hand and talking about motherhood. holding her hand and talking about meaning and purpose of a woman's life. And I was just 22 years at that time, at 22 years old. And
And you had not even
I had experienced
experienced it.
nothing of this myself.
Yes.
But I had read a lot. And so I would hold her hand in between the contractions and converse. And my seniors were like, Taru, what are you doing? Go and do that work.
Okay.
And I'm like, please, let me talk to her. And during contractions, I would stay and just caress her back, just, help her, bear the pain. So
Just being with her in that process. Yeah.
and that's where I felt, if I do gynecology, through her, I can influence an entire family, and I can obviously take care of children through that. But if I do pediatrics, I can't influence mothers that way. So gynecology is a very good entry point into a family.
Into a family.
Right? And I'm able to get in touch with that woman so deeply in her most vulnerable moments.
Right.
That's how it was gynecology for me.
So beautiful. So I'm just looking at the women who are listening into us.
Yeah.
Like I'm also taking away the wisdom that you carry within it to one, understand where do you feel one with what you're doing is what I'm hearing you talk about. And that's what help you recognize this is me, a part of me, and that feels like I can do this, being aligned with what brings me joy. Not necessary that I'm going to be in a specific way. For example, if you were not a doctor, for example, the nurturing can still be done in other ways, perhaps. Whether you became a nurse or whether you simply became a mother, it wouldn't have mattered. But the point is that you recognize that nurturing self of yours. And some people, the reason I bring this up, Dr. Taru, is because some people feel like they have a certain goal in life. And they feel like if I don't achieve that, then I'm sort of useless or worthless. And I don't see myself being any other place. But what I'm hearing from you is the spirit that lives inside us, which can be transmuted into any role that I play.
Yes.
And I also heard you talk about this beautiful explanation or a similitude of how I just have 100 meters to look at this point. And can I give myself completely to that 100 meters? And it will compound itself whenever it has to. You never imagined where you were placed later at a point when you were nurturing the source of your grandmother.
Definitely.
You never did.
And to really tell you, you're right when you say that the spirit here was the nurturing spirit, and being a doctor was just one of the feathers in that.
Yes.
It was just one of the ways to do it. And eventually I ended up doing things like I'm not almost a doctor anymore.
Yes.
I do things that are about nurturing, but not really medicine.
Yes.
Right? So I think there is a beautiful concept that I learned from Dr. Abhay Bang.
Okay.
He was a follower of Vinoba Bhave. And he gave us a concept very early on in life called as Swabhav and Swadharma.
Beautiful.
If you really want to decide what you want to do in life, you're confused, there are two things that you have to know.
Okay.
What is Swabhav? What is your Swabhav? Swabhav means your nature.
Nature.
What are you good at? What do you like doing? So this is my Swabhava, that I am very good at service, at one-to-one service, at nurturing, like a mother.
Right.
And Swadharma is, what is your dharma for today's world?
Okay.
What is the need of today's world? What is the unmet need of today's generation? For example, today's generation unmet need is not fighting for the freedom of the country. That's not our Swadharma right now.
Correct.
But our Swadharma might be global warming.
Okay.
It might be terrorism.
Okay.
It might be this or that. So find a intersection of Swabhav and Swadharma where both are meeting.
So can you tell us some more examples of the unmet needs or Swadharma, like you said, in everyday life of younger growing children, for example? Because this seems to relate to the people who are still growing, trying to find their purpose in life and what to choose and what should I do. Can you tell us a little more about it?
I can tell you that in my own life, whatever I've done has been an intersection of these three, because that was the concept I lived with.
What's the third one?
So third.
You said three, right? These three things you said.
So two things.
Swabhav
and Swadharma. So my nature was the kindering spirit, or the taking care and serving and nurturing. And on the other end, what I saw was intersecting with that was the baby, who was the most vulnerable the representation of the most vulnerable spirit in this world.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, this is who I am.
This is a perfect match
Yeah,
here.
this is a match. Or that woman who was laboring. You know, that pain. So I at that time wasn't really relating to gynecology as much as obstetrics. Because for me, it was a mothering woman and her baby. So for me, the world started with conception and ended with birth.
Right.
Initially.
And
for me, that was two vulnerable people I wanted to serve. That's how I got into gynecology.
Right.
Later on, my paradigm expanded. And from pregnancy, I moved to the first 6 months through breastfeeding.
Beautiful.
Because that was an unmet need as well in our country.
Right.
Because we know that we are known as a breastfeeding nation.
Yes.
Yet only 40% babies are breastfeeding in the first hour of life.
Yes.
Only 6 out of 10 babies breastfeed exclusively. And look at the complementary feeding. 11 out of 100 babies are feeding properly, good quality, solid food after 6 months.
Right.
So this is what I read in my final year MBBS textbooks. I'm like, how are we a breastfeeding country? And so this is an unmet need, and that's how I got hooked on to breastfeeding. So this was my paradigm. When I went to Bihar, where I was working after my MD, I saw something called as malnutrition. So my paradigm expanded to post breastfeeding, creating a program, community-based malnutrition program for villages of Bihar.
Right.
So then I went there because for me, Swabhav and Swadharma was meeting there.
So
I was meeting unmet needs as I walked around the way.
Yes, and you'll find so many of them.
Yes, yes. And then I came a little bit this side when now I'm working on vaginismus.
Yes.
Which
resonates with you.
What happens just before conception, which is a woman's sexual pain.
Right.
Right. So the entire paradigm kind of became my Swadharma, on which my Swabhav was very well matched.
Yes.
Right. And these things I didn't know when I started off.
Yes.
I just knew one thing and I worked on that, and then I worked on that, and then I worked on that.
Right.
And it became a chain of things.
And I can see how it can transmute itself into so many more things eventually in your life, whatever calls you at that point.
Yes.
But essentially you're constantly seeing that this kindling heart that you have, not necessarily that it needs to fit in only one place.
Yes.
It can fit in so many different chalices in a way, right? It's so beautiful that you say that.
And I'm sure now I'm moving on to one more sphere of life that's called as childhood trauma.
Right.
So from that malnourished child, now I'm going further into the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, when I'm looking at psychological development of children and how their subconscious gets programmed through traumas in their houses, in their societies, and in their schools.
Right.
And so I think my next field of work is going to be childhood trauma.
Right. And that's where the intersection happens. Because I heard you talk about the vaginismus, and you said that the several things that have led to the cause of such a condition could come from their own childhood experiences. Right? Being the primal force in our woman's body, where the nervous system responds, it's almost like an antenna. And that antenna that is there within ourselves as women often contracts to fear and unsafe experiences in life. And that builds up compoundedly and then plays up a role later on in life.
Perfect.
And that when I heard you talk about it in the first meeting, I said that's where it interacts with the work that I'm doing, because we do inner child healing. We look at what is happening during the imprints of the childhood. The first 7 years being in portal of just being no difference between me and the world, and everything that enters to me becomes the truth.
Yes.
And that's what we live with later on, right? And then we recognize what are the things that are limited beliefs that we carry in life. Yes. But it's so beautiful that you brought that in. So I want to take a step further into your story and say that now that your husband sowed that seed for you and also opened that pathway to experience the things that you wanted to do. It was in theory for you, but you didn't know how it's going to manifest. But how did you decide to go to Bihar then?
Right. So I had met a mentor who said that I knew that I was going to work in rural areas. So I will have no option of referring patients out. Okay. Otherwise, why go to a rural area if you're going to refer patients out?
Right.
And go to, like 5 hours they have to travel. Might as well not be there, right? So if you're there, you need to know everything. So that was in me, and during my residency period, during my MD period, I learned everything around my field. So I learned anesthesia.
Okay.
I learned pediatrics.
Mm-hmm.
I learned neonatal resuscitation. I obviously learned obs-gynae.
Right.
So I remember during my free time after my OPD work or whatever, instead of going back to my room, I was hanging around in casualty, or I was hanging around in operation theatre rooms to learn, teach me, because when I go to a rural area, I will not have help. I need to know everything.
You need to
And
know.
so I was in Sion Hospital in Mumbai, and I
Okay.
remember spending time everywhere to just gather everything I could in those years.
Yeah.
Like prepare
At least to be
myself.
the first, first attempt to help them.
Yes.
Be the first care.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't say like, oh, I don't know about it, so I
Yes.
have to refer,
Yes.
and there's no one to refer.
And people think that once you're a specialist,
Yeah.
you are in a silo. This is all I can
the
do.
silo, correct.
But
yes.
when you are in a rural area, you can't say, I'm just an obstetrician. Snake bite.
But
I
you
am
are a doctor.
I am a doctor and I have to treat snake bite and I have to take care of malnutrition. I have to do everything.
Everything.
Of course, I didn't know all of this is going to come my way, but I prepared myself. And so when my bond, one year bond was ending, and I was like, God, where do I go now? I am just doing this to go somewhere, but I don't know where to go.
Okay.
I haven't even seen a village. Where do I go? And this 7-8 years of preparation, and you wouldn't believe it, said that when you really want something so badly,
it will
universe
come.
conspires. Literally in the last month of my bond, which we have to do after our residency,
I see.
I came to know of a project in Bihar,
Okay.
which needed young gynecologists to come into Bihar to train their doctors in district hospitals.
Wonderful. Okay.
I said, this is
my opportunity.
I'm
Take
going.
it. Okay.
Right? And everyone was freaking out. They were like, we didn't train you to be an MD for this. It almost felt like I was letting them down by going to Bihar. Right? Why do you need to go there? Or second is, you won't come back. Because you'll either be, abducted or killed or whatever. Because
there were other socio-political situations as well in that place.
That's what we had seen in movies, right?
Yeah,
Ganga
sure.
Jal or Gangs of Wasipur. This is what we had
this
seen.
is what we have seen.
But guess what? It wasn't falling on my ears at all. I didn't care. I was like, I want to go. Because I knew even Bombay is thought of like that. People think of Bombay as gangs and Dawood Ibrahim and all of the underworld. But we know it is not like that. Right? So I left, and I left for that place called as Motihari.
So you basically moved home completely.
I moved home. I moved to Motihari, which was Champaran. And it coincidentally, Champaran is where Gandhiji's Satyagraha started in India.
Incredible.
The Neel Satyagraha, Indigo Revolution. And that's the place where he left his clothes and came into a loin. He started wearing the dhoti in Champaran because the kind of poverty he saw there, he's like, I don't deserve to wear these clothes. I need to be one with these people. And I landed up there. Out of all hospitals in Bihar, for some reason, I was allotted to that hospital, Champaran. And for me, it was like, I don't care what it is Gandhiji's place, I'm going.
Yeah, because that was already a thread of an inspiration for you from his books that you were reading. And for you, I'm sure it must be coming alive to think about, this is where his internal transformation happened. And I'm sure he spoke about it in his book.
Of course.
And then that kind of just is in front of you.
Yes. So, 100 years ago, his Satyagraha started from there. And I remember when I landed in Motihari, his museum was there right on the road. And I was like, oh my God, I'm here. And that's how my life started in Motihari. My job basically was to go and train the gynecologists there in good or maybe better protocols of childbirth. For example, I was told they were doing vertical cesareans.
All right.
I had to teach them horizontal cesareans.
Or
they were still doing ether anesthesia. At this age, which was obsolete decades ago,
I see.
And now is only used for veterinary practice. For animals. We are using ether in Bihar. So even anesthetists had gone there to train them in spinal anesthesia.
I see.
So I landed up in this hospital. People said, you're going to get screwed up. It's a very difficult place to work in. this place, वो मुझे बोला था इस जगह ने तो गांधी जी को भी धोती पहना दी.
Ah,
मतलब like a sarcasm.
Yeah,
कि
yeah.
गांधी जी also was like,
he was stripped off
he
from
was
whatever.
stripped off.
Yes.
So nothing can happen.
What are
there.
you going to do, sort of a thing?
And
Yeah.
when I landed there, effort on day 1 in the district hospital, bustling with patients, I saw a woman being delivered in the labor room.
So I'm going to stop that because she writes that in this book, and I'm going to read that for you because I was blown away with what I was reading, and she writes this as the first chapter, where it starts with by seeing the first hour, and here it is. On the third cot, a woman was crying loud from labor pains, trying her best to push her baby out. Two green screens shielded from her public view. Shobana, a hefty woman with a bindi, long orange sindoor, and forearm filled with red bangles, was encouraging the mother to push. Lagao, lagao, zor lagao. A relative was anxiously standing by side of the cot, clutching a bottle of sarso ka tel, mustard oil. A big gunny bag lay on the ground, stuffed with what seems like 100 small pieces of cloth. Blood and water were puddled all over the floor of the labor room. The three other delivery cots were half broken, rusted, and stained. Mosquitoes thronged them, and there was a dog nosing away at the pieces of the placenta and the dustbin. I can't even imagine this to be real, Dr. Taru. Yeah, and then she goes on to share that stench was so unbearable and the only fan in the room was still. I had just entered the labor room and still absorbing all that was there from a corner when the woman suddenly let out a scream and out popped a baby into Shobha's bare hands. As if by reflex, the relative poured half the bottle of the sarso ka tel on the mother's head and started massaging it. I asked why, and to which the reply was, placenta comes out faster with this oil. Shobha demanded a piece of cloth to wipe the wet baby. The relative searched for a gunny bag and looked for a few pieces, but she said this is not enough and I need a bigger one. The relative feverishly searched for larger pieces but could find nothing at all. And sensing the urgency, she turned the mother over and hastily tore out a large piece from her blood-stained cotton sari, letting out a loud expletive. Shobha took the piece of cloth offered and dried the baby with it. I need another one. Finally, the relative found what she was looking for, a petticoat. She tore it into two halves and offered one half to wrap the baby. Shobha then proceeded to stitch a vaginal tear that had occurred during the delivery. Now, not having a pair of gloves didn't seem to affect her speed or confidence. She turned around to a large table lining the wall of the labor room and found a set of unused suturing instruments, all immersed in a dirty brownish liquid. She ran to wash the instruments in the wash basin in the corner. The pipe underneath had cracked and water flooded the area. She came back to stitch the tear, her bangles making more sound than the baby itself. The relative's arms. I went around to see what she was doing. Like an amateur patching up a tear on a piece of cloth, she was sealing the vaginal tear swiftly with multiple random knots. I'm done. Clean it up, she said to a sweeper in the room. That sweeper, easily with her 60s, put down the jhadu she was carrying and inserted her hand straight into the mother's vagina. This can be triggering for some people, but it's important for us to hold ground to realize this is the reality of what happens in the villages in India. Then she turned around with an irritated expression and lashed out to Shobha. Are you some lat sab? Why can't you do this yourself? Are you not a sweeper too? Shobha continued to wash her hands unperturbed by the scene had affected me deeply. I had just seen two sweepers manage a mother's birth in the largest hospital of East Champaran district of Bihar, the Motihari district hospital. I felt like I had landed on a different planet within my own country. It felt so bizarre. Now I'm looking at these pages and the words that speak to me and have a deep imprint in my own heart. But I'm looking at you to share with me your lived experience of it.
Yeah. So I had known theoretically in my mind that things were off.
Okay.
But to see something like that, just having passed out from the best hospital of Maharashtra, landing up in that hospital with the very first scene being an ungloved hand delivering a baby a, a sweeper's ungloved hand delivering a baby and using sui dhaga, literally the sui dhaga that we use here,
Okay.
to suture the
The tear.
tear. And then using the same hands to do jhadu, and then again doing something with the mother, and then again jhadu. Right? This is not what dais do at homes.
Yeah.
Right? What better are we doing in our hospitals by forcing women? Okay, dye bad. Home delivery is bad. Come to the hospital. And in hospitals, we are exposing them to HIV and hepatitis B with this kind of asepsis, right? Right?
Right.
So it was just beyond shocking to me, and I really did not understand if this is real. It was so surreal for me that I forgot that this is real. This is not a movie. I'm watching this, and this is what I have to work with.
So you had to distance yourself in some way, sort of, because this was too much for you to even process it.
In fact, for the first 2 weeks, this is all that happened. I did not see doctors anywhere because they were busy in private practice right across the street in their own private hospitals.
Okay.
And here, the entire labor room was managed by dais, sweepers, and few nurses who knew nothing. Even they didn't even know how to take blood pressure. And so, if the baby came out alive, he's alive. If the baby came out dead, he's dead. What better were we doing then?
Right. So, what is the idea of the government? I'm sure the intention is the right. So, I'm trying to understand, Dr. Taru, like, what is the incentive to get to the institute, which we think that it's better than having a home birth, to bring them to the facilities? What is their intention and what is the practice?
Definitely, the way it was intended, it definitely was intended to decrease maternal and neonatal mortality.
All right.
And it does happen in good hospitals where the care is good.
All right.
Like, for example, if mothers were to be delivering in KM Hospital in Mumbai,
right,
that definitely is a step up, right, from home birth. The way we have imagined home births,
at least,
right, on roads with some like bhusa here and some kachra here and one cow here.
Right.
The way we imagine home births, it's definitely a step up because there is hygiene, there is skill, maybe not as much warmth and caring, but there is definitely skill, so people
some
don't
clinical
die.
Skill is there.
People don't die. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Here we were bringing people into government hospitals which were totally dilapidated. There was just nothing there. We did not even have an ambu bag there. We had nothing. So it was in no way better than a home birth. And in fact, a home birth would have been better in such cases because anyways, a dai is delivering here or a sweeper is delivering here. You might at least have a dai deliver in
our own safety of a home
space where there would be hygiene.
Some basic
no
hygiene.
Risk of HIV and hepatitis.
Right.
So this just got me thinking, and for the first 2 weeks I saw mothers dying, I saw babies dying. A mother with a ruptured uterus was referred out in an auto rickshaw because the ambulance was not to be seen anywhere.
All right.
The touts were thronging the hospital. The moment the ASHA worker would come with the mother, they would be taken out to the same lady doctor's private hospital whose duty was in the government hospital. So that, and it was such a mess in the hospital that after 2 weeks, I remember I told my husband, I can't do this anymore. I had not come here for this. And I can't just stand there looking at this. And I remember being ready to move out from Bihar.
Okay.
And that's when my husband said, and that's why you need people in your life who can kind of bring in reason, in that time of emotion. He said, we knew things were like that. Probably now we know it's worse than what we thought. But here we are for a commitment of 3 months. Stay for 3 months. If you just want to clean that labor room, just clean it. But do what you can and leave from here. If you can just, ensure that the labor room is even clean with the broom, why don't you do that? It's okay. Your own agenda is not getting fulfilled. It's fine. Whatever you can do, do it. And I said, okay, I'm just going to clean the labor room. So that's how I stayed back. And the moment I stayed back, somehow a lot of help came the next day. Some people came to help me. I found some 4 or 5 nurses who were interested in changing the system. And suddenly I had a team of 10 people who who had the passion to do something different.
So they had a similar. They started aligning with your vision of what you wanted to.
Out of these, most were from the same hospital. They had the passion, but that passion was submerged in the routineness of that system. They couldn't do it. Right? They just needed a binding force. And we all came together, few from the government, few from the NGOs, right? And we all came together and very slowly started some skill building activities. It all started with one case of uterine inversion.
I see.
Where a Dai had delivered a baby and the placenta was pulled out prematurely. So the uterus was sitting in her hand. And I was called. Ki doctor, something has happened. And I knew what had happened. When someone says something had happened, I know what can happen.
It is worse than what already is happening there.
Yes.
Yes.
So she was standing like this with the labor room, with the uterus in her hand, without any instruments, no drugs, nothing. I pushed that back. It felt like there was no tone in that uterus. And for 45 minutes, I just pressed that uterus
back into its place.
She could have died. And people, I remember her relatives were hitting me because they thought I was doing something wrong to the mother. But 45 minutes later, the uterus contracted and she was saved. That's when everyone started to understand that I'm here to help. And that they could have, that day died. The staff would have, they would have broken, the relatives would have broken that hospital. And then they kind of aligned and started listening and started cooperating, and we started doing trainings with very basic stuff like how to check blood pressure or baby's heart rate and childbirth and going on to postpartum hemorrhage and bleeding and eclampsia. And that's when real work started at the ground level, and they started to transform not just in their skills but also in their attitudes. When I told them that, hey, you are the people taking care of everything. If it's a sweeper, I'll train the sweeper. Then I trained the sweeper to do the stitches.
So what I'm hearing, so I'm hearing you talk about inclusivity.
Yes.
Whatever is. Can we do something better about it? Rather than to think, oh, that's not your job and that's not what you need to do. Because you didn't know how to replace it anyways. Because you didn't have resources. And that's a beautiful understanding to just recognize that we can do the best of what we have.
Yeah. And I didn't go there thinking ki they are the problem. I went there thinking that there is a problem.
There's a problem.
And they are a part of the problem. They are doing this because there is a problem.
Correct.
These people were not getting paid for months.
But they were still doing whatever they were
doing it. I mean, I heard that due to some political issues that went on in the previous decades, a lot of people were not getting paid in district hospitals.
I see.
And so all of these things started where doctors started to work out. These Dais and nurses started to take some money from patients.
Just do whatever.
All of that started as a result of some problem. So instead of seeing them as criminals, I started seeing them as a part of their suffering.
A depleted system. A depleted system.
And so there was no anger at them.
Yeah.
Right? So I became a part of them and said, so let's see what we can do in this.
Yeah.
And I also realized at first that we had plenty of money.
Okay.
The best joke there was that Bihar was using, or Motihari District Hospital was using, only 12% of the funds every year that were coming from the government.
I see.
Rest of the money, 88% was being sent back because it could not be utilized. So when it gets sent back, then government penalizes that district hospital saying, you didn't use the money, you wasted it. So next year it comes lesser and lesser and lesser. So it's not that there was no money, they were not utilizing it because people were not interested in opening up those accounts and take the money out, because then there is accountability. Where did that money go? So they just don't want to do anything. So even though there was money, there were no instruments here.
Right.
So we had to encourage the accountant. We had to work with the accountant, inspire him to get the money out, and then fix accountability, make registers. It's routine in Bombay to have handovers, right? Every 8 hours there will be a handover of everything to the next team.
They didn't have a system there.
No handovers.
Right.
So everything had to be established from the ground, not just skills, but infrastructure and human resource.
Processes.
Everything had to
processes
be done.
And everything. Yeah.
But we still could not inspire doctors to come.
Yeah.
Right? I remember in the operation theatre, the OT Babu was doing the surgery in a banyan. Because he's like, it's too hot. I mean, and there were 12 people watching the cesarean. So we had to literally start by ensuring that people just wore different set of slippers, cap and mask. That was the first intervention there. To recognize that an operation theatre is not the same as a living room. Can't just walk in. That took us 3 months.
3 months.
And then later on things started to get transformed. And in 6 months' time, people said things have been done which haven't been done in decades. We had a new DM or a collector come there who was a very inspired guy, Mr. Jitendra Shivastav. He called me and he said, Taru, give me a PowerPoint presentation of what you've seen here and what can be the solutions. I did that. He took notes and said, Chalo, let's start doing it.
Okay.
And he actually poured out funds. He shifted out people. He brought in inspired people. He gave me a lot of power to make change in not just district hospital but also in peripheral health centers. PHCs.
Wonderful.
So in that entire district, because of now his help, not just the infrastructure, but the skills at the ground level started to change. People they now knew what was Apgar score. They now knew how to do resuscitation. These village DIs were doing resuscitation, and I have spoken about how we did the trainings in very local terminologies.
Yeah.
And really things started to change, and in a year's time, Modi government had announced a Kaya Kalp award.
I see.
Which was an award of district hospitals of the whole state.
I see.
Whichever hospital wins gets 50 lakhs as the award money.
I see.
Moti Hari District Hospital won the first Kaya Kalp award. 50 lakhs. And people were like, no, cheating hua, because they could not believe that a hospital that was like so gone was now the role model. Then they won again.
Okay.
And now it's said that it's a role model hospital in the entire Northeast India. And things obviously, when some people leave, they fall a little, but they don't fall back to the initial low.
Right. So there's a certain benchmark that is baseline's been set.
So there is. Yeah. So this for me was such a big experience because it was my first project after MD.
Yeah. Right? Almost like a birthing process, what I'm hearing, right?
And then I saw change doesn't take generations. Change just took 1 year. And if in this 1 year I was in Mumbai, what difference would it have made to Mumbai apart from a few patients getting influenced? But here the entire district was influenced by my presence for a year.
Yeah.
And so I just couldn't come back.
Yeah.
Even though I was there for only 3 months initially, I stayed there for almost 2 years. And after that I moved to a rural area where I established a health center in a village. So from a hospital-based intervention, now I went into a village-based.
That is more grassroots that you went into.
Of course, and it was tougher. I'm way tougher.
I'm imagining that. Yeah. So you say it so simply.
Yeah.
All the things that you've done, and when I'm looking at the nuances and the layers of negotiation you've done, not only with language, culture.
Yeah.
Because change management is the most difficult. Everybody knows that. Yeah. If it comes to a point where someone has to change, the first is resistance always. And they don't want to make a change because they don't recognize that it needs to be changed either.
Yeah.
So you're crossing many, many layers of not just human resistance, but also a systemic resistance.
Yeah.
Right? So what are those qualities that allowed you to now dip in not only the kindred heart, but what are the other skill sets that you had to soup out of yourself?
So the first thing that helped was I was just 29 years old or maybe 30 years old.
Okay.
I didn't care about what others thought. If today I were to go there to do the same thing,
you would think.
I would think twice.
Okay.
But at that time, that young blood, I remember when I spoke to the district magistrate about all this and I started doing changes, some doctors were very pissed off. And I remember a doctor telling me, he was giving me a threat. Come out and I'll see you. And I said, please do it. I'll come outside. I don't care. Right? I wouldn't say that today. So, I think that
there's something about being young, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, someone had told me, maybe my husband only, should we give the best years of our life to our country when we have this kind of energy
And attitude.
I don't care spirit?
Yes.
When you need that spirit to get things done,
Right.
or do you want to spend your whole, like you want to do your own life and your own thing, and when you have arthritis, not just in your knees but also in your mind, that's when you start giving to the country.
Yeah.
When you are probably
Not going to be
in that level, you also have cynicism, you don't have like so much hope, right? That I could do that because I did it when I was 30 years old,
Right.
And that's why I believe in your like from the age of 25 to the age of 35, that is the time when you should give at least 2 years of your life to this country. Now I'm not asking you to stay in a rural area for all your life. I'm just saying 1 to 2 years of your core skill, whichever is your core skill. You could be a scientist, you could be a mechanical engineer. 2 years, go and serve in areas of need and give your leadership there. It's not that you have to do everything. Like I didn't do everything in Bihar, but I just inspired. I just brought in that leadership where people came together and did what they had to do. So we just need leadership in such areas.
Right.
Go there, do it for 1 or 2 years and come back and do your thing. As if everyone would do that, it will be a pass in the parcel and nobody would have to spend 30 years in such areas like Dr. Abhay Bang or Dr. Prakash Amte did, right? So that's the model for our generation.
Right.
And that's why. So the first thing you said was what helped. I think my age helped. The second thing that helped was having a partner who was not pulling me away from that. Who was in fact like, Taru, do it. When I wanted to run away, was like, do it, I'm here with you.
He became the cocoon for the germination to happen.
Yes. So having a partner who's not constantly pulling you into domestic life or pulling you into supporting just him.
Yeah.
He can also be a source of support for you.
Yeah.
To think unconventional and push you when you are losing it.
Yeah.
So I think a partner really helped. Third, having read a lot of great books helped. During my graduation time, when there's plenty of time, so I wasn't into parties or reunions. I was into libraries and books when I was in my graduation, and I read a lot of people. And during my time in Bihar, when I was just losing the battle, I remember those books on my table, just a chapter of it, and I would get the energy back. So reading a lot, or maybe looking at a lot of movies of, like a lot of autobiographies or biographies.
Yeah, something that
like
gives you the inner world. Yeah.
The Motorcycle Diaries really inspired me.
Okay.
That really inspired me of how he transformed into a social worker and how he changed that area of leprosy. You know, there were lepers in that area. So that really helped. So books helped. Partner, books, your age, and of course mentors. So I had a few mentors who had already done this work in rural areas.
Right.
And they had not now come back, and like Dr. Roy, Dr. Nobojit Roy was a head of surgery in BRC hospital at that time. But he had spent many years working in rural area, Jhagadia in Gujarat.
I see.
So he was like, he had done it all. So when I used to write to him, he's like that words of soothing. Don't worry, you'll get
because he sees the other side of it. He knows the whole spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah.
So mentors really help.
Mentors really helped. Yes.
And what really helped was writing on social media.
I see.
I used Facebook as a way of describing or transcribing all these stories so that people sitting in US or Canada or Mumbai or
anybody
Delhi,
for that matter,
they were like in big cities, they were reading this, and even though they were not doing it, they were a big source of comfort and encouragement for me. Do it.
So community matters.
Community
matters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it.
And I'm also looking at not just your local community, right, Dr. Taru? You're not only talking about what is within Bihar, where the village that you were in, but also looking at your community that you related to, which was more in the city.
Yes.
So I can see that you have developed that way because you couldn't be there in the city and the village, but you brought the city with you in the social media.
Yes,
it's such an amazing thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just so amazing to see the resources that you're kind of listing out here.
And I really feel effort. People who are doing different work or unconventional work should maintain a diary, because these are precious lessons. And if you don't write them out or share them with the world, they are lost with you. So I remember I almost wrote a diary on Facebook. Every day I used to do a diary entry.
Okay.
So when later on I had to write this book,
It came of
I
use.
had forgotten a lot of things. So I just downloaded everything from Facebook and elaborated them into chapters.
Beautiful.
Right? So it's important to keep writing. And I mean, a book or a blog post or a podcast or some sort of channel.
Something that essays your life.
This where you can share your lessons.
Right.
This is your contribution to the world. Right? We are probably not going to invent a bulb.
Yeah.
Or we are not going to maybe do such things. Or we may not have freedom movement to fight for. But we have this. This is our contribution to the world.
Yeah.
Which is the lessons of change.
Lessons of
Which
change.
could be change in social structure, change in a particular field. It could be lactation. It could be just the change that you brought. And how did you do it?
Yeah. It doesn't matter which sphere you are in.
Yes.
You see that as a change that ripples off everywhere.
True.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Taru, the reason I feel like this is also important for us to, just absorb everything that you're talking about, because we do live in silos, the way you mentioned, right? We have this silo of people who look at birth and respective maternity care and imagine that everything that happens in the hospital is traumatic because it seems like they don't know anything. That's the approach we have towards it. But that is simply now, it's humbling to just see that it is a condition on which we need to bring a change. And no one is doing it because they want to be a problem.
Yeah.
It's a exhaustive, depleted system from top to down. And it is not that anyone intends to harm, but to bring in the best whatever. Even the sweeper who was doing, she was doing whatever she could at that point.
So everyone was in a self-protection mode.
Exactly. Yeah.
So right from the civil surgeon, the civil surgeon was taking money to, transfer nurses from here to there every 3-4 months. So the nurses would pay up to the civil surgeon to just stay put in one hospital because they don't want to be in some village and travel 12 kilometers to come to another hospital, right? So they would pay. Now, where does that money come from? Then it comes from the patients.
Yes.
Right, so it's just transferred down and they are just protecting themselves.
Yeah.
When they are not getting salaries and
Yes,
they have
they
to
don't
pay
see the safety, right? If they see the safety of the fundamentals, that's when they can open up to contribute what they have to do. They have families behind them. They have responsibilities. So they have to run that whole thing. So it all becomes its own vicious small circles everywhere. And I'm quite amazed to see how can this system that you create in this Bihar hospital that ended up being appreciated and looked at as an example, can this be a role model for it to be replicated in every district in India? So can you tell me in concise form of the most important aspects of the elements of the system that was created that allowed it to become an self-sufficient, efficient system of its own?
So the number one thing was to understand that we do have all the resources that we need.
Okay.
It's just that we are not utilizing it. So we needed someone to inspire people to take the money out, use it where it needs to be used, and fix accountability.
Okay.
Right? Like we need to have registers, we need to have handovers. So fix accountability and use the money. We have plenty of money there.
I see.
We are not in dearth of money in India. Right?
Okay, so I think that's a misnomer that people have, that we are depleted because we don't have the funds.
Yeah, of course. We had plenty of it. Like I said, 88% of the funds was being sent back.
So do you see this to be the same situation everywhere else?
It's Maharashtra, Karnataka
are
the ones that ask for additional money because they use up everything.
I see. Okay.
In that year, I saw that Bihar was sending, like Moti Hari was sending back 88%. But there were states that were finishing off what they got and they were asking for extra. Right? So it's not there everywhere. But yes, there are many places, I would say in Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, these areas, the so to say Bimaru states, we don't use that word anymore, but where there is a lack of initiative to use funds. Because कौन करेगा इतना काम? Yeah, we don't want to do that much work, or we don't want that kind of accountability. If people ask questions, where is the money? What would I say? Right? The second one would be, we need the leadership to be inspiring. The leadership of hospitals is doctors.
Right.
No one else is the leadership, not even the civil surgeon. It is the doctors that are the leaders of the system. And if the doctors have deserted the system, what is going to happen to that?
There's
system?
no hope then.
So if the doctor is there at 8:55 a.m., the OPD starts at 9, he's at 8:55, how can anyone else not do that then? And if the doctor is there all the time during duty, can you think of a hospital where the doctor is on duty, but he's saying, I'm not going to stay in the hospital, I'll be in my hospital. Whenever there is a cesarean, only then I'll come. That is what was going on. So we need doctors to be inspired, right? And the third biggest problem was, if government doctors are allowed private practice, then this problem is going to be there, because the moment, they will want to continuously run to private, right? And their engagement their own government hospitals will decrease.
Right.
For example, in Mumbai, in municipal hospitals, they do allow private practice.
I see.
But in government hospitals, they don't allow private practice.
Okay.
So I have worked in both. And I have seen in government hospitals, my teachers used to literally sit till 4:30 p.m.
Okay.
And they were always available.
All right.
But in municipal hospitals, that's not true. The moment they take rounds, they're gone. So I would say private practice for government hospitals should not be allowed. They should be paid handsomely, so they don't.
So you don't see a lack of funds to pay them either. Okay.
They don't have to keep yearning for more money then.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yes. Fairly, they should be paid fairly for the skills and education they bring in. Right.
The fourth, I would say, is bring in young crowd. For example, the concept of bond. Right?
Okay.
After we've done our MD, we are supposed to serve the government for a year.
I see.
I think that's a beautiful concept. I'm talking about 1 to 2 years for the country. Why don't you use this 1 year for the country, which is the bond?
Right.
In that 1 year, if fresh blood, which is just off their MD, circulates in all rural hospitals, then imagine the amount of fresh blood coming in every single hospital, which brings in that amount of vibe and vibrancy, right?
Right.
Instead of just those old 70-year-olds sitting there, right? So implementing the bond sincerely and making it easy for young people to do that,
right?
Instead of making it like a punishment, you have to do it, right? Make it lucrative, make it beautiful. Right. We need to do that bond in a way that can be very beautiful.
But anyways, the bond is there.
Anyways, it's there. And people don't end
you
up
can
doing
utilize it in the right way, rather than just spending the residency in the hospital where they studied.
Yes.
For example, and it's not adding anything to them.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be circulated, you're saying, so it can pump in that fresh blood and vitality into those systems that are depleted, not reaching the micro circulation.
Perfect.
So that's really beautiful. So yeah.
And one more thing would be to work at the level of the ground workers.
Okay.
To not just say, hey, you do this. Just join hands with them, be at their level, understand their problems. Right? Work with them instead of work on them, right? Telling them to do things, versus understanding what makes it difficult for them to work and solve those gaps, or maybe plug those gaps for them.
Can you give me an example of how you got to work with the people who are at the grassroots?
So, for example, in this hospital, I saw that people were not inspired, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I would tell something, doctor, we don't even have a toilet. We have to keep holding for 8 hours. What do you expect us to do in this hospital? Right? So, right from just building a toilet for them, or maybe a resting room for them, where there can be a water filter, to a doctor, like we did Shramdan. Shramdan means Gandhiji's place, right?
Yeah.
So I said, let's have a day of Shramdan.
Okay.
Where I and my team took jhadu and detergent and cleaned everything of the operation theatre in 4 hours.
Okay.
So they saw an MD doctor holding a jhadu in her hand and sweeping and scrubbing the floor. So she realized, we are one. we are together in this. There is no hierarchy. She's doing her job, I'm doing my job.
Yeah.
No one is above anyone else.
Yeah.
And so when the leader comes down at the level of the ground staff, they feel one with it. And I remember we felt like family. And these were the people who were corrupt. Huh? These were charging money from patients, all of that.
Because they didn't know what else to do. Like you said, they were in self-preservation mode. Yeah.
And Gandhiji's one dialogue that every heart has a pure flame inside.
Absolutely.
It just has to be captured. And those people had it, but it was just covered in smoke of the mess they were in.
Yeah.
Right? So always to believe in the fact that people have good hearts.
Yes.
They want to do it, but they are stuck. And all you have to do is to spark that change.
Yes.
And lastly, remember that you don't have to do everything in this revolution. You just have to spark it.
Spark it. Yeah.
Just be there as a leader to spark it, and it will spread.
It will spread. It's the nature of the fire, isn't it? It's going to spread. Yes, that's such an incredible journey that you've had in talking about different aspects of how systemically something can be changed. And the most wonderful thing that you spoke about is not recognizing that there are no less resources. We have resources, but we don't see them as resources. And that part, the awareness that can be brought to the resources that exist within us, then we can see how we can transform the difficulty into an opportunity of change.
So, infrastructural resources are there, but emotional resources are not there. The workers don't have emotional resources to work.
Right.
And that has to be instant.
And is that the way that you were talking about, coming down to the grassroots level, working with them and regeneralizing their heart to know that you're not alone in what you're doing. I am with you in this.
And a lot of appreciation and acknowledgement for what they do rather than punishment for what they don't do. They're always told, you don't do this, you don't do this. Okay, what are you doing? Claps. Right? So a lot of positive motivation. Right? You lead by example and you also appreciate that. And some bits like just a plate of samosa party can do world of a difference.
Oh yes.
Sit together, have chai and samosa. The kind of vibe that generates, you can get anything done. And these were still people who are not getting paid. And they still did the good work.
Right.
So you see that the motivation was not even money later on. The motivation was this appreciation and this joy.
This joy, just being social about the whole thing, bringing them to feel like we are a family, we can do it together. We can have less resources, but we are not less resourced.
Yes. And I am important in the system.
I'm important in the system.
Like even the sweeper started to feel I'm so important that she stopped doing deliveries because she's like, no, I have other work to do. I need to clean that area. Right? So even the cleaning became so important because we took the jadu in our hand. She's like, the doctor is doing the cleaning. This is such
then
an important
it is sort of bringing the awareness of, okay, what is my duty here to do? So everybody starts to realign themselves to the responsibilities that they need to do simply because of what you give them as that love and joy that you shared with them. So that breaks so many silos, so many different silos here. Yes. So I'm also curious to know, Dr. Tharu, now that you've moved away, a little bit away from that system and now looking at a family system, right? So you're still looking at a system there and you started to work more intimately with women. Can you tell us about that a bit?
So you're talking about breastfeeding or
breastfeeding and then how you moved into vaginismus?
My work in breastfeeding again was just an accident. One day I was taking rounds in the hospital and I was just doing routine questioning. Okay, no bleeding. Okay, uterus contracted. She said, doctor, everything is okay. I'm not able to breastfeed. And I said, why are you not able to breastfeed? What should I tell her? So I just gave her some 2-minute lecture on why to not use formula, the routine stuff. And I did not know how to latch her baby, frankly. And I left. And I was 3 months away from passing my MD. And that baby convulsed that night. And I was shocked next morning. Hypoglycemic convulsions can lead to lifelong mental retardation. And I said, this baby, absolutely wonderful, 3.5 kg convulsed. And I couldn't tell anything to that lady. Nobody could help. The nurses, the doctors, nobody could help. And I couldn't help because I frankly didn't have the skills.
Right.
Then I started searching for answers because it was a huge moral dent on me that 12 years of medical education and this happened. And then I discovered the breast crawl.
I see.
So that was my start into breastfeeding. So I did 100 breast crawls in 2 weeks in Sion Hospital.
Yeah, because that numbers are there.
2013.
2013.
And it was dramatic. I think the amount of interest I had to do breast crawls was way higher than the amount of interest I had to do deliveries in that labor room. I was more interested in breast crawls to see that magic and to see that those primigravidas or paras were breastfeeding in wards later on as if it was their fourth baby. I was like, this is the trick, the start.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into it through the breast crawl.
Right.
Then WABA, World Alliance of Breastfeeding Action, found that I was doing this and called me as a youth leader from India in 2016 and in their Silver Jubilee conference. And I met a lot of youth leaders across the world who were passionate about breastfeeding.
Okay.
And then all of us were trained in the next year in 2017 in a course. They have their signature 14-day breastfeeding and advocacy and practice course. I did that course and my eyes just opened to the whole world of breastfeeding.
Okay.
Right? And that's when...
So there is a world, isn't it, doctor?
Of course.
Yeah. So I think when I speak to other pediatricians and other people who are in this world of taking care of the babies and being the first contact of the family after the baby is born, they often think of collapsing the entire world into a simplistic thought of, okay, the baby needs to just latch and it should all just work out.
Yeah.
Right? So if it doesn't, then I have the formula.
Yeah.
So it is so simple as a system for them that this is the only way it works, because they don't see the world that it opens into and what are the issues that these mothers have or the babies have. So I want you to elaborate of just a bit of showing what this world is that you did not see before.
So the first game changer thought for me in that course was how birthing impacts breastfeeding. Because I was a gynac and I had seen a very traditional labor room, like a military labor room with 10 beds, women stuck to the labor cots with the IV in their hands.
Okay.
So I read this book, How Birth Practices Impact Breastfeeding.
I see.
That transformed the way I think about breastfeeding, because I was a gynecologist. If I can transform the labor room, I saw the labor room in Malaysia in their district hospital with a carpet, with a birthing ball, with some ropes from the ceiling, and they were holding that and squatting.
And bearing down.
And then there was a jacuzzi
Right.
where a woman was sitting down in warm water and husband is massaging the back. I couldn't imagine these things. And then I realized the same hormone that is responsible for birth, which is oxytocin, is the same hormone which is responsible for breastfeeding. So if you mess up with hormone oxytocin during birth, you have messed up your breastfeeding.
Exactly.
Finished.
Yeah. Finished.
So your breastfeeding actually starts not from birth, but it starts right from she gets the first contraction.
Absolutely.
Right? And we mess up that first hour because we messed up the entire puerperium or the entire parturition.
Process of the labor itself.
Yes. And so now the only thing I talk everywhere, because everyone else can do rest of the breastfeeding talking, but the talk that is mine is to speak to gynecologists about
the link that you're creating.
How birthing impacts breastfeeding and how you can transform your labor rooms and cesareans, family-friendly cesareans and this and that, to ensure that you are in an oxytocin high environment when you're delivering. And that automatically...
Which is naturally a part of the process, right?
Yes.
So why not tap into it is what you're saying.
And you can still do it if you have a perspective shift.
So what is your 3 most important things that any doctor who is in the labor room that can transform and preserve the oxytocin surge that happens at that point, that can give us a head start in breastfeeding?
Number 1, the way we speak to the mother. So if you have a harsh birthing environment where there is constant screaming, there is constant blame, there is constant, you are not pushing down or you can't do this. So a very warm. Imagine having a mom with you during birth. How does that feel like? So the birth environment needs to be like the mom is around.
What is so difficult, doctor? When you're talking about this, you're talking about simply being human about it, right?
Yes.
So are we saying that we are actually birthing in inhuman conditions?
We are, because the most of the times the nurses are women.
Right.
But I see nurses the most brutal
When it
sometimes
comes to
when
birthing.
it comes to talking to women, because sometimes I seem to see that men are more empathetic towards women during childbirth, especially male gynecologists, than female gynecologists or female nurses. Sometimes they don't seem to have empathy for it.
So what do you think is the reason for them to not feel that?
They themselves have gone through a lot of pain. They themselves didn't receive empathy.
Right.
And they thought that's the way it is.
Hmm.
If we have done it this way, why are you any different? So I believe it's just become a protocol or a routine in labor rooms to not have the woman, to not have enough respect or warmth. Or even if they're not shouting, there's just apathy. We are just not looking at her. We are only looking at her fetal heart rate. We are only looking at her dilation. We are not even looking at her face. Right? She is doing the most difficult job of her life without her family members.
Without her, ma'am.
So first is birth environment.
Okay.
Second would be a birth companion. Even if you don't want to allow a guy in a big labor room, you can allow the mother, you can allow the sister, you can allow
somebody who she knows.
Yes. Third is allow her to move, man. Don't just keep her stuck to one place with the IV line in her hand. Allow her to ambulate or take the position, because women in labor will not just keep sitting.
Yeah, because they
want
need to
bend
move.
forward.
The body is using the wisdom to move around.
So many times they'll squat, so many times they'll bend forward.
Right.
You know, they need to take position.
And is it difficult to implement these three changes in any system, doctor?
I saw it happening in the district hospital, government hospital of Malaysia,
Okay.
where women were just loitering around in the labor room.
So they are in labor, basically.
Yeah, they're all in labor. But it's just a perspective shift. Can we think of it like that instead of thinking of it as a military labor room, where everything is like, designed for the comfort of doctors and nurses, instead of being designed for the comfort of the patients. So there, it's not like you have to go to the table and deliver.
Right.
Wherever you are, the doctor comes there and delivers. If you are on the floor, we'll do it on the floor.
Right.
Right? Of course, in Indian systems, we'll have to think how we'll do it. But even if we can't do everything, we can do a lot.
We can do a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
And lastly would be minimize painful interventions.
Right.
Unnecessary pervaginal examinations, unnecessary cuts, episiotomies.
Okay.
Right? Or an unnecessary forceps or vacuum.
So what is the reason for unnecessary? When I hear you talk about unnecessary, I'm coming from a place of belief and trust that a doctor knows when to intervene.
Right. So there are a lot of times when traditions just go on because they are traditions. So where I studied,
so it's just a routine.
It was a rule for every primee or the one who's delivering for the first time to get an episiotomy. It is a rule.
It is a rule. Okay.
But
it's a protocol, you would say.
It's a protocol that's
I see.
Coming from generations.
So you just follow it.
And for people who are delivering the second or third time, you judge.
Okay.
But most of the time that still ends up being given.
Because it's already been tampered with.
Yes, so we have a lot of episiotomies, and that's like, then again you can't sit and you have pain, and then no oxytocin, and
then you can't breastfeed because of that pain.
Yes, then again, like, everyone gets an IV. Why does everyone need to get an IV?
Right.
You can allow her to take sips, right? Sips of water. So I think there are some things that are just happening by tradition. And like, for example, we don't need the CTG on the abdomen 24/7.
Right.
Amount of anxiety that creates the CTG, the sound of that CTG, or a woman constantly having a monitor here.
Right.
When we need it, we do it. I'm not saying these birth interventions are bad. They have saved lives.
Yes.
They have brought down the mortality rate.
Yes.
But we also have to look at experience. Time has come to look beyond just death rate. The time has come to look at the experience of birth.
Right.
Not just dead or alive.
Right.
Right? And I think we can do that even in the systems we have.
Right.
It's just some perspective shift.
Some perspective shift. And those 3-4 things that you mentioned hardly requires any additional
And
resources.
no separation at birth.
No
Very
separation,
simple.
right.
You have to do the breast crawl. If it's
Yeah.
a cesarean, you have to do the skin to skin.
Right.
Unless you have some issue with
Some
Apgar
issue.
or something.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to require a lot more, but just a perspective shift of how we can utilize the resources that we
Yeah.
are. And what I'm hearing you constantly talk about is more than other resources that often we feel is the system depleting because of the funds. You're only talking about human resources, the people who are there.
Passion, the
Yeah, the
emotional
emotion
resources within we
within
are
them.
lacking.
Yeah, such a beautiful insight you're giving me.
Yeah.
So I can go on and on and on, Dr. Taru,
Yeah.
with you. It seems like you are a treasure of wisdom, not just in recognizing the wisdom in your life, but also how you have lived it. You truly have lived your truth. So, I would love to have another conversation with you, which will take us into the current contemporary work that you're doing, which is again to do with women. But of course, it's a whole topic of its own, and we have to delve into that. So, looking forward for another episode with you.
Fantastic. I've never had such a detailed podcast with anyone because it's generally very hurried. So it was very much in depth and I could speak. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so
Really,
much. Thank you. It's such
Thank
an honor and humbling
Thank you.
experience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.